This is an oral history interview with Cherry Emerson, November 28th, 2000, in the Lewis Music Library, interviewed by Forrest Larson. It is my distinct pleasure to welcome Cherry Emerson to this interview. It's November 28th, 2000, in the Lewis Music Library. Cherry has a master's degree in chemical engineering from MIT, class of 1941. He had a very distinguished career in engineering and business. He's a pianist. He was the primary donor who made the renovation of the MIT Music Library possible. And this library is named in honor of Mr. Emerson's mother-in-law, Rosalind Denny Lewis. Thank you very much for coming. It's really wonderful to have you here.
Well, it's very nice to be here. Again, I always enjoy visits to MIT. And by the way, I think you should say a comma after your last sentence there. The wife of Warren K. Lewis, a professor of chemical engineering, under whom I studied, and whereby I met his daughter Mary, who may be known to you, and the fact that we married not long after I got out of MIT.
And we will certainly get into that more later on. So, you were born in Atlanta in 1916. Can you tell me about your father and some of his influences on your professional development, your choice of a career, or just what you'd like to say about him?
Well, that's a very interesting story to me, and I hope, therefore, to you.
Yeah, his name is Cherry Sr.
That's correct. I'm a junior, but after his death, some 10 years, I dropped that name, that junior, and since then have been known as Cherry L. Emerson, Cherry Logan Emerson. But he put me through the public schools in Atlanta. I put myself through, I guess is the right phrase. And then came the question of college. Where would I go? And since he had been a Georgia Tech graduate of the class of 1908 and 1909, and wherein he was the first master's degree from Georgia Tech, he wanted me to go there and study engineering at MIT, but I wanted to study chemistry because I had become very well acquainted with it in a senior high school class under Professor Haichu, who was well known in the chemical field. And I just wanted to progress in that field rather than even study engineering. And the reason I went to Emory University instead of Georgia Tech was that the chemistry department at Emory was known to be one of the best in the South at the time, and under the direction of Professor J. Sam Guy. And many people recommended that chemistry department to me. I searched around for good information. And so I decided to go study under the Department of Chemistry at Emory University. And you might be interested to know, you won't find this out from anybody else in the world, Ira Remsen, who was the president of Johns Hopkins University, and as well the founder of the chemical department, the modern chemistry department at Johns Hopkins, and who, in truth, came up with a university system for the colleges of the USA, and had a big influence intellectually on how the college life in America developed. Had his own chemistry lab, and my grandfather, who opened the doors at Georgia Tech, had studied under Ira Remsen. He came to Georgia Tech and lived and died there teaching chemistry. A second man studied under Ira Remsen and came to Georgia, Charles Herty, Herty, who became the first president of the American Chemical Society, and the third man, J. Sam Guy. who came to Emory University in Georgia, and I knew some of this history. And so mainly about J. Sam Guy, and so I went there. And that little anecdote about Ira Remsen is something that is in print in a book called The Life of Ira Remsen, written by a chemist named Getman, Getmann. And MIT should have that in its library because Ira Remsen's name in the history of the development of the university system in America is profound. Well, does that answer your question?
Sure,
All
sure.
right.
Tell me about your mother, Sina White.
Sina.
She was obviously a musician. Was she both a singer and a pianist?
Yes, she had a good voice and loved to sing. And we had the piano in the house, but I'm going to tell you how my piano got there later on.
Right.
And she knew Alfredo Borelli, my later on teacher of music, mentor of music. And I mean music, not just piano. And she wrote a song which Ellen Harris has right now.
When We Were Sweethearts.
Yes. And Ellen has sung part of that to me. Thank you, Ellen. And she wrote the words and music for that, and it was in the style of the famous songwriter. I'll have to come back to that. And
Dudley Buck?
No, not Buck. A well-known. Well, I'll think of it before this interview is over. And she put a lot of effort and work into that because it was her only chance, really, to do what she wanted to do. And she did it well. And the song never sold any quantity, but it sold to a few people in Atlanta who knew her. And it's a nice piece of music, I think.
It certainly is.
And so we'll leave it at that. But she, the first bar of that song was written by Alfredo Borelli. She did it all and then asked him for an introduction, and he obliged by writing the first bars. I think the first 6 bars.
Tell me about your mother's influence on you musically, the support that she gave to you to play the piano, and also, did she come from a musical family?
Well, that's a very good question, and the answer to that is yes, but it was primarily my grandmother.
And what was her name?
Her name was Sina Harris, Harris, just like Ellen Harris. And she was really a wonderful lover of music. She could play the piano well. And all of her life, she indulged in music. She and her husband, Woods White, went many times to the Bayreuth Festival in Germany. And in those days, to travel to Europe was quite an expedition. And I know that she went a number of times and she gathered paintings and brought them back home and hung them in our home. And she had, I would say, 20 or 30 beautiful German paintings of the countryside in the Maine that she brought back from those festival occasions. So my grandmother was a leader to my mother, who I guess passed some talent anyway to me. And there was one other, the next to the last child of the Woods Whites was my uncle named Houston White. And Houston White had really most of the talent for music that family had. It came down to him, and he was really a wonderful pianist. He studied all of his piano with Alfredo Borelli, and was the man who recommended Alfredo Borelli to me, as I will come back to because I have to. But Houston White was so good that Borelli told his father that he should go on the stage and make a career of playing the piano. And Houston didn't want to do that. He had seen too many people try unsuccessfully.
So what was his eventual career?
And he wanted to go into law, and he eventually became an outstanding lawyer. He was certainly the best trained lawyer in the South at the time. He had gone to Davidson College, a Rhodes Scholarship to, I think it was Oxford in those days rather than Cambridge. And then came back, went to Harvard, got a law degree from Harvard. That was not enough. He went to Princeton and got a law degree in international law from Princeton under a fellow named Edward Corwin, and for whom he named his second son. He named his first son Houston White Jr., and his second son, Edwin Corwin White, who also has a lot of musical talent. He is now a professor at the University of Alabama in Tuscaloosa teaching opera and voice, and he's a fine singer. So there was a talent in the family, I think, originating with my grandmother, White, Sina White, and she passed it along to those two children of hers. Sina Harris was her name. I said, well, it was Sina Harris White was her full name.
So with singers and pianists, were there any other instruments played by?
Yes, Houston was a multifaceted musician. He played the clarinet very well and was the principal clarinet in the early Atlanta Symphony Orchestra. And he played for an opera group which went around the South. And
what was the name of that group?
I don't know.
Yeah. There were a lot of small kind of short-term opera groups that were touring around at that time.
That's
and,
correct.
Yeah,
You have it sized up exactly right.
Yeah.
And my first opera was when he collared me and took me over to Athens, Georgia, at the University of Georgia, where this opera group, whatever their name was putting on Faust. And I heard that was the first opera I ever heard. And Houston played the principal clarinet in that opera of Faust.
How old were you at the time?
12,
Uh-huh.
12 years old.
Wow.
And that was my first adventure, you might say, in music. And Houston had a big influence on me because he saw I had a minimum of talent anyway, and he wanted to develop it. And he was the man who said to me, well, I'll come back to that, because when I was 13 years old, I did start music work, piano work, under a Mrs. Caldwell, Coldwell, whose son at that time was the president of the University of Georgia. just I can't help telling this anecdote, but his schedule to visit his mother was my schedule to visit her for a piano lesson. And he frequently interrupted my piano lesson. And here I was, this 13-year-old kid there trying to study piano, and he would burst in the door and embrace his mother, and he would say, "Mom, I'm flat broke, I need some cash." And she would go out and bring him a $50 bill, the president of the University of Georgia. So if this gets on the record and gets down to Georgia, they'll first get a good laugh out of it, and then they may come to see me. But I saw that several times. And I studied with Mrs. Caldwell for a good part of a year.
What was her first name?
I cannot remember. Yeah. She was always Mrs. Caldwell to me, and to me she didn't even have one. But then I exhibited my talent to Houston White, and he listened carefully to several pieces that I played, and then he said, "We can do better than that. You go to see Alfredo Borelli, and I'll call him up."
And we'll get to more to Borelli in a
right. And so that's how my musical career started. I could do a tarantella for Mrs. Caldwell pretty good, pretty well, and lots of short pieces like that. But it was not real musical training, and she didn't know anything about the Mozart technique at the piano and that sort of thing. So you just sort of worked out your own fingering. And I had to.
Yeah, that was so common with some of the music education in areas of the country like that.
That's right.
There's a gentleman who's about your age who's a violinist who studied violin with a piano teacher. She didn't even know how to play the violin.
Yeah.
And he had to figure out how to play.
Sure. Well, I had to figure out how to play the piano.
Wow.
But Morelli took care of all of that. Oh, he was a disciplinarian.
Wow. So tell me about your siblings, brothers and sisters, and were any of them musical?
I had one sibling, my sister, Dorothy Elizabeth Emerson, and she also went to Alfredo Borelli. I think she was a year and a half older than me. And so she went to him, and he, in essence, in a very polite Italian way, said, "Don't come back." He thought that it was no point in trying to teach her to play the piano. And she could play around on it, and she could play church music and things like that. And did. And for all of her life, I think she kept a piano in her home. But she was not a musician, believe me. And she was not much of a pianist either. She was a dear sister, but that was all. And she did not contribute to the musical talent of the family.
Your mother, Sina, did she study a lot with Borelli and kind of?
No, just a little. But he was a good voice teacher, a very good voice teacher. He came to Atlanta. Some of this will be out of order, so to speak. But he came to Atlanta in 1880 when he was 27 years old. And the first thing he did was to form a Borelli School of Music and a chorus and a choir and things of that order. And he taught singing in a very professional way. And his daughter, Louise Borelli, was a fine singer. I've heard her sing many times.
Did you study voice with him at all?
No.
No.
No, I never did. It didn't work out with my schedule. I came after Mrs. Caldwell. I was just 14, just barely, when I met him for the first time, and he was 77. He became a very good friend. He was really a third grandfather to me. That's the way I have said it many times. And he taught me things that the other grandfathers couldn't teach me. And so it was really a very, very good association.
I'll give you more chance to talk about that as we go along. Tell me some of the memorable childhood musical experiences, concerts that you went to.
Yes. Well, I told you about my first opera. And Atlanta had a fledgling Atlanta Symphony, and I would go to hear them. And then a feature of my life, really, which my mother loved so much, she really loved those operettas that toured the world at that time, and the Chocolate Soldier and the Student Prince and things of that nature and many more would come to Atlanta time after time because they could fill the houses there. And she took me along to hear those operettas, and I really and truly enjoyed them a lot.
Were there any particular favorites that you had?
Well, those two that I first named. Because they come right to mind, and there were others. And she was also a film addict, and she would take me to the movies with her.
Silent films, and did they have
silent films?
Did they have live music with the films?
Yes. Oh, yeah. The pianist in front of the film
playing. My grandmother played for silent films.
Did she?
Yeah.
Well, yes, that went on all the time. Rudolph Valentino, I'm one of the few people alive who ever saw him. And he was a favorite of hers. And
So what were some of the films that you remember going to?
Well, Moby Dick, believe it or not,
Wow.
was a film.
Uh-huh.
And I was really frightened at all of the water that was in that thing, the ocean, you know, and so on, and tussle with Moby Dick. And then I saw Norma Shearer in several films because my mother liked her in particular. But I can't remember the names of them. They were romances of one kind or another. And the Rudolph Valentino, he would produce a movie every other week, it seemed. And you could see him, I can remember him riding around on that white horse of his all over the desert. And I don't know what desert it was, probably one in Hollywood. But he was just someone who, for a short time in my life, made an impression on me.
Mm-hmm.
And
now the music for the silent films, was there times when there was a theater orchestra, or was it just piano that you remember?
there was no orchestra, it was just a pianist.
Yeah, because sometimes they had orchestras.
Yeah, but that was probably in New York, and
Mm-hmm.
we're talking about Atlanta.
Mm-hmm.
They could afford a piano player, but I don't think they could afford an orchestra. But along with the films in those days went vaudeville. You acquainted with that fact?
I didn't know that they had filmed in vaudeville acts.
You could go to see Norma Shearer, say, in a movie, and when the movie was over, the stage would light up, and out would come one act after another of vaudeville. And sometimes they had orchestras for that, and sometimes instrumental soloists and that sort of thing. But that was probably pretty rudimentary. And then they would start to film all over, and if you could pay 25 cents and you could stay there all day and see the film 2 or 3 times and the vaudeville 2 or 3 times. It was a bargain, to say the least. But very little serious music went with it.
Did you hear piano recitals or chamber music concerts as a child?
Oh man, you have struck a point. Yes is the answer. I have seen Rachmaninoff play several times in Atlanta. And I have seen Paderewski play in Atlanta.
Were these solo recitals or
solo recitals? Yeah, in the old barn, we called it, the Civic Barn, cold, windy, and terrible acoustically, and yet there they were playing to very large audiences. You could get 7,000 or 8,000 people in there, and they would fill those seats. And so I remember those, and then, of course, the German pianist who was so famous in those days, he used to play a lot of Bach.
who are you thinking of?
Well, we'll have to come back to his name, too. I'll try to remember it tonight and tell you. But he played to much smaller audiences. He would come and play at the Women's Club in Atlanta, a famous club sitting on Peachtree Street in 14th there, and my grandmother White was one of the founders of that club. And this gentleman, I'm trying to remember, it started with an S, I'm sure. Anyway, the pianist from Germany, he would play every year. He would come and play there, and I would go religiously because I knew I was listening to real talent. And I'll try to come up with his name for you.
Now, there are programs. What was a typical program? I've seen some of these concert programs where there's a lot of operatic transcriptions and things like that mixed with more, more serious, classical repertoire.
Like Liszt might play?
Yeah, but like some of these piano recitals, like when Rachmaninoff played, what would be did he play some of those lighter pieces as well?
No. He stuck with his own music and music like it that he approved of, mainly Russian music. And there's a lot of good Russian music, as you know.
Did they ever play with like piano trios or anything like that? Do you remember any chamber music with them?
I don't remember any
Yeah.
piano trios. I remember a few duets,
Mm-hmm.
but
Piano duets or
yeah,
yeah,
two
yeah,
piano pieces.
yeah, right.
But I can't remember the names of the
Mm-hmm.
people who did it.
Mm-hmm.
But Atlanta was full of music.
Mm-hmm.
There was a New York person who would act as an agent for traveling musicians, and he had a routine of sending them from New York to Atlanta. And so it was a series over the year, particularly the winter part of the year. And they would come down there, and I would buy tickets to that series. And I heard some great music like that, Rosa Ponselle and people of that nature. Rosa Ponselle sang Aida in the only opera that I ever acted in. And you know what part I had right off. I was one of a group of spear bearers. But that was what, and Giovanni Martinelli was Radames. I forget who the others were, but Rosa Ponselle and Giovanni Martinelli sang Aida the last time for Rosa Ponselle. She retired that year. That was while I was at Emory University.
Wow.
And she retired after that and just left the scene. But she sang a beautiful Aida. And I stood on the stage at the Fox Theater in Atlanta. This is where it all happened. And Giovanni Martinelli sang in the second act where we came in. He had such a tremendous voice. I stood only a few feet right behind him, and you could feel the floor panels just moving up and down. It was amazing to me. I almost didn't get off the stage, but I did. And I had many musical experiences of that nature that kept me very interested. But at that time that I just spoke of, I was studying under Borelli, and seriously.
When did you first hear chamber music, string quartets and things like that? Because you're known to love chamber music, and I wonder
Yes.
when you first got exposed to that.
When I first heard it, I would say possibly at Agnes Scott College, which is girls, it was at that time all girls, and I think still is, out in Decatur, just a little bit east of Atlanta, 2 or 3 miles maybe. And that's the first one I can remember. But I got interested in chamber music right away, and I've heard so much of it since that I don't know just when and where I really first began to enjoy it so much. But I'm sure that at this woman's club there was chamber music that I spoke of that my grandmother helped to found, and where, I get frustrated over these names, but
You're doing wonderful.
I'll try to come up with the 2 names I owe you now. Victor, the musician who wrote in the style my mother wrote in, Victor Herbert.
Yes.
Victor Herbert, that was it.
Yes.
We said it simultaneously. She loved Victor Herbert's music, and her song, Ellen will tell you this, was in his style.
Mm-hmm.
And
It certainly is. Yes.
so,
yes.
All right, you agree.
Yeah.
And I'm sure he had a profound influence on her. Just listening, she didn't know him at all. But
So
I know you only one name now, and
Yeah.
I'm sure I can come up with it.
So getting back to Pharaoh Borelli, 1854 to 1935, for those hearing this interview who are not familiar with him, could you briefly describe him from a biographic, historical point of view? There's a a full-length biography of him, so we don't need to go at great length. But for those others who are hearing this interview who may not know Borelli, from your personal standpoint, how do you kind of look at him historically?
From my personal standpoint, well, he was a wonderful man and human being. He loved people. He loved musicians in particular, and he was the founder of classical music in Atlanta. He came there in 1880. There was nothing, and when he died in 35, it was a well-developed musical scene, and he played the primary role in that. At his school, he taught hundreds and hundreds, running into the thousands of students over the years. And there's no doubt of that. And he had a number of outstanding ones who went on to musical careers, primarily as teachers. But he taught not only singing, and both male and female, but also many different kinds of instruments. He would teach students how to play effectively, and the piano was his big love. So he had been playing the piano since the time he could reach the keyboard, I'm sure. And as you say, there's a lot in the history books about that. At the age of 10, he made a concert recital in some hall in New York. I don't know which one it was. And so he was well known, and many musicians considered him wonderful talent. And he was. But, and I'm going to come back on that, so don't think I've lost the thread here, but he had health problems. And
it was asthma, wasn't it?
Yes. I don't know exactly what it was I was going to say, but he told me it was asthma. And he carried around oxygen on wheels that he could pull with him and inhale the oxygen to help him when the asthma was bad. And we used to take walks together, and he would sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes he would take that device with him if he hadn't been feeling well that day or something like it. So I think he was an undeveloped talent in that respect, that he didn't have enormous physical strength, which is a great asset to a pianist. You just ask David DeVoe, and you'll get the whole story. And he was, when I knew him, I would have to call him a rather frail individual. He probably would have been ready to dispute that right away, but I really believe I'm right. And it meant that he never had enough drive and strength to, for example, go on a career of piano recitals around the world. But he could play a piano wonderfully well, and for short times when he sat down there, you knew you were listening to genius. That's one of my talents, is to find talent in other people. And even in my mentor there, and he was a mentor, I could recognize how good he really was. So my impression was I'm in the presence of genius, but it's a frail genius. That's about the best I can say.
Now, he's also known in the musical world as the nephew of Adelina Patti, 1843 to 1919, a very famous American opera singer, and
right,
and that whole family.
You want a few comments on that?
Sure.
Well, Adelina Patti was born in Spain, and in 1843, and she her family moved to Italy, where she became first famous as a singer. And wait a minute, I strike that. Her family brought her over to New York as an infant, so to speak. And they were living just north of New York City in a beautiful little setting. And that was where she had her first training and was recognized. There were many musical stars in this physical location of New York, and many of them heard her sing. And she was a child now, I'm talking about 8, 9, 10 years old, and they recognized how good her voice was and tried to encourage her to continue, and she did. And when she was, I think, 13 years old, she was singing in the Metropolitan Opera. Now, that's to be checked from the history books, but at a very early age she was. And she was 11 years older than Alfredo Borelli. And his family had come from Italy to New York, and they commingled, of course. And they visited one another, and the Pattis were making out financially better than the Borellis, so they moved toward that beautiful home that the Pattis had in New York. And he visited her many times there, and she would sing to him. He told me that as a mere child, a few years old, Adelina Patti was singing to Alfredo Borelli. And I'm sure that had a big influence on his interest in vocal music, which was paramount in his life next to, say, piano. And there's much more to be said about their relationship. Adelina Patti went on to make many millions of dollars in the 1860s, 70s, 80s, 90s. She retired in, I think, 1913 and died in 1919, I believe.
That's right.
Is that right? Yeah.
That's right.
Good. Maybe I can come up with that other name, the pianist, but you'll know it as soon as I do. Anyway, they were very close. And she went through 3 husbands, and the third husband, and she built a castle in Wales, Craignos,
Oh, yes.
Craiggynos, Craignos. And she made that her final home. And the Borelli, first Alfredo and his wife, would go over there yearly from Atlanta to visit with Adelina Patti. And that was where he played this music you have recorded, was in her castle.
Uh-huh.
That was where it was played. The only...
That's right, it said on the record jacket, yes.
Yeah, okay.
I didn't know where that was.
Yeah, that was Adelina Patti's home in Wales, Craiggynos. And they put the piano, Alfredo Borelli told me, up on boxes to elevate it for some reason. So they had to lift the stool, of course, for him to sit on. And he was in a very precarious position when he made that recording for her. But they loved one another as cousins. And, oh, wait a minute, he was a nephew, closer than a cousin even, I guess. All of his life, he knew what she was doing, and she knew what he was doing. They corresponded. I don't know where all of those letters went, but many of them in the Atlanta Public Library. The correspondence between Adelina Patti and Alfredo Borelli, and particularly Louise Borelli. She, the daughter of Alfredo, and Emily was his mother's name, took a liking to Adelina Patti, and she in turn took a fancy to Louise. And Louise used to accompany Alfredo Borelli. When Mrs. Borelli stopped going to England It was Louise and Alfredo who went over. And I'm sure that she financed the trips because while he was well enough off to have a meal every day, he didn't make a lot of money for sure. And that was quite a trip in those days to go from Atlanta to England. And so I guess that's enough. I can tell a little more, but
Yeah,
that was the substance of their relationship.
Mm-hmm. So moving back to Borelli, can you talk about some of the important musical and pianistic ideas you learned from him?
The Mozart technique. Mozart taught Hummel. Hummel taught Hiller, Friedrich Hiller of Switzerland and Germany. And Hiller in the conservatory in France there, it's in the book, I forget the name, but the city, but it was near the German border of France. And Borelli went to that conservatory, and Hiller was the piano teacher he had there at the conservatory. Do you think there's something wrong with that?
No,
Yeah.
no, I'm still
Okay.
seeing if I had written down the name of that conservatory. I thought I had written that down as a reference.
Yeah, there's a big story about that. But there you see the Mozart technique pass from Hummel to Hiller to Borelli right there in that conservatory. You know what I mean?
Yes.
The roll of the wrist and the fingering that's so rigid. Mozart is the hardest thing to play. Do you play the piano?
So I'm a violist mostly, but I studied
yeah.
piano in college. So,
well,
yes.
if you've ever tried to play Mozart's piano music,
Yeah.
you will agree with me. David DeVoe does, anyway.
Yes.
And when David and I agree on something, it's the truth. Mozart was such a genius. It's just absolutely amazing. But that technique he passed directly to Borelli. And so I learned it from Borelli, and it came right from Mozart. And I don't know how we got started on this, but you asked a question.
Yeah, asking about the
mind.
musical and pianistic ideas you learned from Borelli.
Oh, yes. Well, I learned fingering from Borelli. And he was a disciplinarian. When I went many times, hundreds of times, to his home there too. On that piano, you probably got a picture of it. It's in the book.
Mm-hmm.
I played that. That was a concert grand from Steinway that they gave to him. He concertized in his early youth, and they gave it to him to keep, and he did. And there's a story connected with it, as there is with everything. I'll come back to that. But he sat me down there and he made me play all of the scales until he was thinking I was ready to start doing something else. And the arpeggios, and I had to play those at some length before he could see that I was making a little progress each time, and that he liked it. And so that was the disciplinary function that I found from him about playing piano, that you had to know how to do those things and do them very well before you were ready to play anything. And then he started me on things that jeunesse. I don't remember who even wrote it. It was a French woman, I think. And youth, isn't that what that means?
I think so. Yeah.
Young people, something like that. And I had to play that and many other pieces of that nature, including the Scotch poem of Edward MacDowell. Have you heard my story on that?
No.
Well, Edward MacDowell was a good friend of Borelli. He knew the family, and he came to Atlanta many times, and the Borelli home was his hotel. He just moved in there and stayed for whatever time he stayed in Atlanta for one of those musical festivals that Borelli inaugurated or whatever. And Edward MacDowell wrote the Scotch poem. It's a beautiful piece of music. And I have reintroduced it to Atlanta. It's being played around there now. And if you need a copy of it, I'll get you a copy. And somebody, David DeVoe, would just love this piece of music, and I should get it up here for him to play. But it's being played now in Atlanta by several people, and it's very dramatic. It sort of has the Fingal Caves feeling to it.
Yeah.
And it's water. You can just see the water moving around, and he gave that to me to study. He just said, "Here, take this," and I had to go buy my own copy eventually. He didn't supply many.
How old were you when you started studying with him?
14.
Okay.
And by this time, I guess I was 16. This tale I'm telling. And he got ill again and was out for 2 or 3 weeks. He didn't want me to come. He said, "I'll call you when I'm ready," and finally he did. And I had studied this piece, and I had just made my mind up that I wasn't going to blow this one, and I was going to do a real good job on it. And so we met maybe 3 weeks after the incidents of that. And he said, "What do you want to play?" And I said, "This." And I didn't say any more than this. And I sat down at the piano and I set the music aside and I played the Scotch poem for him. And when I finished that, he said, "Cherry, Paderewski couldn't have done that any better." And I think that was probably my high point in musical experience, particularly with him anyway. And he wouldn't have said that if he didn't believe it. And so I played things fairly well for him, like Beethoven's Opus 13, Passion, no, not the Appassionata, the Pathetique.
Yes,
Pathetique.
That's right. Yeah.
I could do that without missing any notes. And that made him fairly happy, but he could point out so many things in the course of that where he thought the phrasing wasn't right and the accent wasn't right and the rhythm wasn't right and all, that I knew I could never please him completely on that one. And there were many in that category.
What were some of the other pieces that you studied with him?
Well, I played a few Mozart pieces for him.
Do you remember which ones?
Oh, you're asking for a 70-year recollection, and I'm sorry, Forrest.
That's okay.
But
But some of the piano sonatas?
Yes.
Yeah.
And I played a wide variety of different pieces that he wanted to have me play to show me how technique would be different on this piece and that, and so on. And
did you play any J.S. Bach?
No jazz Bach.
J.S. Bach.
Oh.
Johann Sebastian Bach.
Oh yes. Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Do you remember what stuff from the Weltender clavier, probably?
Probably.
Yeah.
I can't remember now.
Yeah.
I've still got a lot of my music at home right there in Atlanta. I could go and look and maybe come up with the answer, but I played Bach for him. I played Mozart for him. I played MacDowell for him. I played a lot of Beethoven for him. Beethoven was the thing he really loved, I think, most of all, because he understood about Mozart that it was really difficult, and the elegance that is just so apparent in all of Mozart's writing that you just have to deliver on in a Mozart piece, and I guess I wasn't too elegant, but he kept me at it and disciplined me in many ways, so he I may have played some Handel for him too, because he was very interested in Handel, Haydn, Mozart, that era, you know. And Handel precedes them all, but he taught me music. He didn't teach me just the piano.
Tell me more about that, what you mean by that.
That, for instance, I, in the book, say that we became good friends, which is certainly true. And I had an automobile, and he didn't. And so I used to take him on drives up into the North Country in Georgia, into the mountains. Georgia has 4,000 feet mountains, foot mountains, within 75 miles of Atlanta. And we used to go up there, drive up and sit on the side of a lake there that I remember, and we would just talk about music, and he would tell me his recollections, like you are interrogating me now. He would tell me about Bach and Mozart and Beethoven in particular, and Chopin. Oh, I used to play a lot of Chopin for him, the Polonaises he loved, and he could let me go my way a little on those things. You know, they are bombastic, at least quite a bit that way. And I would say, as a group, those Polonaises were the best that I did for him, technically. I don't know about musically, but I could hit all the notes and make it sound pretty good. And you could let yourself go on one of those Polonaises so easily.
What about some of the other American composers? I know that that he was friends with Amy Beach.
He knew Amy Beach very well. She was another hotel guest, and she and Louise were very good friends. And so Amy Beach came a number of times to their home in Atlanta, and particularly patronized Louise. But I never met Amy.
Did you play any of her music?
No, I never played a note of Amy Beach's music, but I love her music. Those piano concertos of hers, I don't know how many she wrote, but 2 or 3, I think. But they are first-class music. And people have finally begun to realize that.
Certainly, it's been a real good change that way.
That's right. No, I didn't know Amy Beach, but she was a friend of the family, and knew all of them. There was an Alfredo Borelli Jr. who became an architect in Atlanta. And he was their oldest child, and Louise was their younger one, and there were just the pair of them that were the only children that the Borellis had. And after Mr. Borelli died in that accident, automobile bus accident he had, they were forced to move to smaller quarters, and they moved over into the Highlands group in Atlanta, just really only a few miles away, in an apartment. And that's where they lived together. Louise never married, and her mother, Mrs. Borelli. And I used to visit them there rather frequently, just because I knew them so well. And that's where they lived until Mrs. Borelli died, and then later on Louise. And they were sort of isolated in those days. It was sad to see, but nothing much I as a youngster could do much about.
What would you say Borelli's lasting influence on you is?
Music. Without him, I don't think I would ever have gotten as interested in music as I did. I really mean that. I think my mother was, compared to him, a slight influence. And he just opened up the world of music to me.
And how long did you study with him? I know
4 years, 4.5 years.
And after you stopped studying with him, you kept playing though, right?
Oh yes, I
Yeah.
played for many years afterwards.
And are you still playing some?
Not for anybody else.
But you
play,
do. You still play.
I can play the piano a little, yes. But we should go back to the story of the piano.
That's right.
Because it is a good story, and he had a hand in it. When I transformed my studies from Mrs. Caldwell to Mr. Borelli, I had just an old rattly upright, which was my mother's piano. And Houston White said, "Go find yourself a better one." And so I did. And the way I did this thing was as I was looking ahead. Now, I started this when I was 13 years old. And wait a minute, even earlier than that, I started this when I was 12 years old, 12, 13, and 14. And for 3 summers there in Atlanta, I peddled Coca-Cola because the area we lived in called Morningside was in the stage of rapid development for homes. And there were carpenters and other workmen working all around Morningside, and I could open my eyes and I could see that there was a business. And so I borrowed $3 from my mother. I bought a case of 24 Coca-Colas from Coca-Cola, and at 2 cents a bottle, by the way. What's that? $4.80, something like that. And I had the rest, and so I paid for that first batch. And then they came back every day in the summer, except Sundays. And they would deliver me 24 Coca-Colas, and I would pay them cash, and I would cool some of them in a bucket and put them in the wagon, drag it around there, and all of those workmen just waited for me. Their eyes lit up when I showed up. And I could sell all the Coca-Colas I could bring into that action. And at the end of those 3 summers, I had $685 in the bank. That was an enormous sum to me. And I don't know as I've done as well proportionally since. But anyway, I had this money, and I went to see Mr. Borelli, and I said, "I now have enough money, so I think I can get a piano. Will you please come with me and test one that I think you might like?" And he went with me to the Carter Piano Company in Atlanta, and he went to this Steinway Paula Grand, 5 feet 11 or whatever it is. Its serial number is 265625. I'll never forget that number. And he sat down and played it a while, and he said, "Jerry, that's the piano for you." And Mr. Carter had been standing right there by the piano all of this time listening, and then his eyes lit up because he thought he was going to sell it. And eventually he did. But I said, "What do you want for that piano, Mr. Carter?" Right away, Mr. Borelli was still there. And he said, $1,100, and it's yours. And I said, "Well, I don't have $1,100, so I'll look around elsewhere." And I did. And some weeks later, this is another story. I was in the Baldwin piano shop there in Atlanta, and they did have a good piano there, and I could have bought it because it was $750, and I knew I could get that one for my money. And I was sitting there in some chair thinking the whole thing over, and in walked this gentleman. I'll never forget this. He just took over. He was an obvious somebody. And he walked over to the Baldwin piano that I'd been playing on, and he sat down, and for an hour All he did was play scales and arpeggios. And I just sat there fascinated because I knew what was going on, and I knew that here was a genius. And do you know who that guy was? Jose Iturbi.
No.
You know that
No.
name?
No.
Oh my goodness. Well, look him up then on the internet. He'll be there. Jose Iturbi, Joseiturbi. Jose Iturbi. He was a famous pianist in the era of the 20s, 30s, and 40s, and well known all over the world. He was a Cuban, and he played many times in Atlanta. I heard him perform in concert, and he just walked in, and I had the opportunity to hear, and he played the same things I played for Borelli. So I thought, well, this is something. But anyway, to get this story finished, I went back to Mr. Carter then. This is now 3 weeks later. And I said, look, Mr. Carter, I found a piano up in Baldwin, and it's just about as good as this one, and I can buy it. And so I would prefer to have this Steinway. And what will you sell it to me as your rock bottom price? And he said, $1,000. And so I said, well, goodbye. And so I walked out, and on the way home, a great idea occurred to me. And I went to my bank. They kept the bank books there for you in those days, and I got my bank book out, and there it had a sum total of $685 in it. And I walked right back to Mr. Carter's place, and I said, look, you see this bank book? That's mine. You see my name there, and it's got $685.02 in it. And I said, I'll give you everything that's in that bank book if you will sell me that piano. And he called around to his fellows. He had 4 or 5 fellows in the sales department there, and said, come over here, fellows. And he says, this kid wants us to sell him this piano for $685. It's all the money he's got in the world. Shall we do it? And they all raised their arms up in the air and said, yes. So help me, that's exactly what happened. And so I went back to the bank and brought him back a check for $685, and the next day he delivered the piano to my home. That's how I got it. And I kept the 2 cents. So that was the story of the Steinway, and it still sits right in my parlor. And it is a beautiful instrument. I've had many musicians play it aside from myself, and it's got a particularly beautiful bass. And it's the real McCoy. There's no doubt about it.
Right. Wow. I had just a few other questions about Borelli. Then we need to move on. Did he ever talk to you about why he stopped composing? Because it seemed like well before 1900 he had stopped composing. Did he ever say why?
No, because I can only surmise, Forrest, that this is the reason. He produced that cradle song of his. You've undoubtedly heard it.
Yes.
I pass the music around here, and I know people like it. And that became a famous piece.
Mm-hmm.
He sold over 250,000 copies of that. And I think he got, I don't know what he got, but I'd guess 20 cents a copy maybe for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Probably sold for 50 cents, something like that. And that's not a lot of money, but it in those days was substantial. And I think that he figured he never was going to do any better, because those mazurkas of his, the dances and all, they were very good music, but people didn't need that kind of music. I mean, for a home playing the piano at home, they didn't mean anything to people. You can't go out and form a dance party there and dance to the mazurka, but you could sing the cradle song, and it was just an outstanding effort on his part. And I think he said it's a tough business, and I'm not going to do any better. And I think he sort of discouraged himself from going any further. Maybe his health deteriorated, I don't know. It's very hard to answer that question, but that's best guess I can make.
Yeah. Did he ever play chamber music like piano trios, piano quartets, and things like that?
No, not that I know of.
Yeah.
But I have a good friend, Edwin Hanley, who was known
Scarlatti scholar. Yeah. Right.
Yes, and he was a friend of Klaus Liebman, by the way, who came here from UCLA. That's where Ned Hanley worked all his life. And he played the violin, and he and I played chamber pieces.
I was going to ask about that.
For Borelli. The Beethoven Romance and a Schubert piece that I can't remember. Those were the key elements that we did. And that was Beethoven and Schubert. And we played a fair amount of that material for him, just because Ned wanted to be in on it, so to speak, and with him and me playing together.
So Ned Hanley was a childhood friend of yours?
A lifelong friend.
Yeah.
He's still living out there. It's a lot more than childhood, although we met one another in the Boy Scouts at the age of 12. We have never parted company. He's the same age I am, a little older, less than a year. And we are in contact right along. And he's a fine musicologist.
That's right.
And
does he still play the violin?
I don't know. I don't know. Yeah. As a matter of fact, though, I think I have a recollection now of asking him that very question out in his home in L.A. a few years ago, and he said no at that time, but I don't know whether he was dead serious or not. You can't ever stop a musician from fiddling around.
Yeah. Yes.
And I think he probably played the fiddle a little today, but I don't know. Be the same way I would play the piano.
Did you hear Borelli ever play concertos with orchestras or anything like that?
No.
No.
No. But I heard him play a lot, quite a bit.
What were some of the memorable performances that you remember of him playing? Pieces? Or?
Well, he loved the Moonlight Sonata, and he used to play that for me. And I don't know whether he played the Appassionata or not. I can't remember. What is that? Do you remember?
I forgot the opus number on that.
Yeah. But he would play the Beethoven sonatas primarily. He and I had a thing going on that, so to speak. I would play one, he would play one.
Yeah, didn't he say he considered the Beethoven sonatas the Bible for pianists?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah.
You got it right. You hit the nail on the head there. He did, in reality.
Did your love of music come into play as you were deciding on a professional career? How did that...
Oh, I'm introspective. Some people have no introspection, and so they don't even understand what it means. But I'm introspective, and I knew that I was not good enough to go on the stage, concertize on the piano, and make a living. And so I put it out of my mind. I never considered it seriously, in other words. Although I could play Beethoven sonatas so people could enjoy them, I don't think I could play them so they'd plunk down $10 a head to hear it. And I'm realistic too. I'm not going to try to do the impossible. I'm willing to do something that's hard to do if I know that it's possible to succeed. But That was just never in my ethos at all to make a professional musical career. I know that probably disappoints you, but it's the truth.
Yeah, I mean, playing music, you don't have to be a professional in order to
Really love it.
to really love it and to
Yeah.
even play it well.
Yeah,
So
that's true.
yeah,
And
Are
that's
there-
where it fitted in my life.
and that spirit has stayed with you for all your life too.
Yes, that's
yeah.
true.
Are there particular composers and pieces that have been favorites of yours over your lifetime, and can you tell me about some of that?
Oh, I had quite a repertoire when I finished with Borelli. And by the way, I haven't mentioned even to anybody interested in me, let's say, the fact that I was good enough so that I didn't want to stop studying the piano when Mr. Morelli was killed. And so while I was at Emory University, I enrolled in the Atlanta Conservatory of Music. And I studied under a man there named Charles Beaton, Beaton. And he's in some history book somewhere, I'm sure, because he was a fine pianist. He toured all around the South. And he and I got along together. He wanted to know how good I was, so when I walked in there, I sat down and played the Opus 13 of Beethoven for him, and he said, "Okay, you'll do," something like that. And so he took me on as a student, and he introduced me to the Mendelssohn concertos.
Oh.
And I played both of those.
Did you ever get to play those with an orchestra?
Well, here's what I was coming to. I made him happy with what is it, F minor concerto, I think, the first that Mendelssohn wrote. And I could play it pretty well. And he said, "I want you to play that with an orchestra. I'll get the orchestra together and we'll practice and you'll do that." And I said, "No, you won't." Because at that time in my life, I was an assistant scoutmaster in a troop where the scoutmaster had walked off the grounds and left me in charge of it. I was at Emory University studying hard to get along, and playing the piano with an orchestra. I knew how much work it would take, to get that thing in good shape. And I just said, I'm not going to try it, that's all. And so I never did. But you can play those concertos without an orchestra
right.
and enjoy them.
That's right.
And I did. And I worked for a little over a year with Charles Beaton. And then the Atlanta Conservatory of Music was in a piano store there in Atlanta that, what was the name of it? There's another name. But I have a picture of the fire that burned it up. And it was destroyed completely. And Charles Beaton was in that fire. And he came down the fire escape and had to drop to the ground. They ended up a few feet off the ground in those days. They didn't even go down to the ground. And he hurt himself, his foot, badly, and he never got over that. And although the Atlanta Conservatory a year later tried to come back, it was dead Depression days. They weren't able to get enough students back, and I went back, though I was going to study under Charles Beaton. But the man was a wreck mentally. And newspaper rattling out in the hall, for example, outside his door, and he would rush out to see if there was a fire going and this sort of thing. He was really nothing like the Charles Beaton before the fire. And so I just said I can't do it to myself, and I didn't go back. I told him I wasn't going to come back. I don't think he would have been able to teach me anything that was worthwhile afterwards. Mm. But the Atlanta Conservatory went out of business, and I think it was 1937 or 8. Right in there, they had the big fire. And so that was an episode in my life where I continued studies in music. But Charles Beaton was a piano teacher. Borelli was a music teacher. And that was a big difference in the two.
Did you ever play any of the Borelli piano pieces besides the...
Just the Cradle Song.
Just the Cradle Song, yeah. What about some of the popular ragtime or other popular pieces of the time? Did you
I played to myself those.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I didn't even tell him, but I used to play. What's the famous guy?
The Entertainer or the Maple Leaf Rag and things like that.
Yeah, but the one I played those. But George Gershwin, I used to play. I played the Rhapsody in Blue my own way.
Yeah.
And I just had fun with the piano. That's what I was trying to do. Mm-hmm. And so I did a lot of that on my own. Yeah, how could it be otherwise? I didn't want to be restricted, to any rigid group of pieces that I had to play. I played a lot of Rachmaninoff. Some of that preludes I did for Borelli, by the way. I just didn't mention that. I had forgotten it, overlooked it. But I played quite a bit of Rachmaninoff, and I liked it.
Wow, that's considerable technique involved for some of it.
It sure is, yeah.
What about some of the Liszt Rhapsodies and things like that?
No, I never played any Liszt.
Yeah. So, moving on, your studies at Emory University. You got a bachelor's degree in organic chemistry in 1938 and a master's degree in organic chemistry in 1939.
That's right.
You mentioned earlier why you chose Emory University. Can you tell me a little bit more about what it was about the field of chemistry that really appealed to you? I know you had a teacher in high school that was influential, but was there something about
Dr. Heitschel? Yeah,
right.
He was the only really professional man I had as a teacher in high school. He was a professional chemist. He stood out. He was good. Well, I told you, my major talent is recognizing talent in other people. And you could just see that he was good. And he inspired me in chemistry, and that's about all I can say. You go to college and you know that you've got to major in some field. And so I decided, actually before I registered there, that I was going to major in chemistry, and I never changed that feeling. Mm-hmm. And I don't regret it. I think chemistry is one of the world's fascinating subjects.
It certainly is. Can you tell me about the curriculum at Emory University at the time? Was there much in the way of liberal arts, and just what was your feeling about the curriculum?
Well, yes, there was considerable liberal arts, and that was actually the emphasis that Emory gave to the whole college. And science was the weakest element in Emory's curriculum.
But the chemistry department was strong, you were saying.
It was strong, yeah, very strong. It was the outstanding one, still is to this day. But science has been a neglected subject. When I got back to Atlanta in 1985, I sized that situation up without any difficulty, and I really started using all the influence I had to strengthen science at Emory. And I know you asked me about what it was like when I was there, and I know I'm off the subject, but I'll get back to that. And so finally, I got them to agree to a program which we named Science 2000, just to have a good name for it. And this is 2000. And we have just now finished a building in my name there, which is going to be the most modern chemical laboratory in the world, just because it's right now it's being occupied maybe even while we're talking. And there have been 2 or 3 excellent changes in the faculty there, increases in the faculty. And in particular, a man named David Lynn from Chicago, who is a powerhouse in chemistry. And we've got several in that department anyway of our own before he showed up. We have probably the best theoretical chemistry department in the world at Emory University. Keiji Morikuma is the man who's running it. He studied in Japan. He's a Japanese under a Nobel laureate. And in my opinion, he must have by now been nominated as a Nobel person, but he's never been elected, and he probably is going to be. That's my guess. And we have another, and he has developed that theoretical chemistry to a degree that people are coming from all over the world now to study in that department under him. And we have one in particular in the United States, a fellow named Bill Miller, William Hughes Miller, a professor of chemistry at Berkeley, California, University of California. And it's conceivable that he could, after retiring from there, come and work at Emory, because chemists don't die at retirement age. They hang around and do things. And so we have now strengthened science at Emory considerably, but it's all been so far in chemistry. And it's one of the real fine chemistry departments. Just go ask the chemist you know in your group here, and he'll tell you the same thing. And you know Lightman, David, isn't it?
Yeah.
David Lightman.
Yeah.
He knows that. Talk to him about it.
Wow.
And so what I got into over the years has slowly developed into a top flight organization there, with a little influence from me, but other people did all the work. And my influence primarily there has been the same one that I've had all my life, that I recognize talent in other people. And I think it's paid off to a degree there at Emory. But when I was there, the liberal arts were what you had to study. And for example, my first year I had Latin, and I loved Latin, and I did a lot of work on Cicero and what's the other famous Latin poet? Oh gosh, now I owe you another name. But anyway, I studied Latin for a year and got fairly adept at it. And by the way, Emory University, at the end of my first year, which would have been 35, put on for the Southeast group of colleges, their cultural departments, whatever, classical languages. They all came to Atlanta and got together in a big church there named Glen Memorial Church, and we put on a Latin play.
Right.
That was something. And
which play was it?
I don't remember.
Yeah.
But I spoke to Joanne Chase. She's the wife of the president of Emory, Bill Chase. And for some reason, this came up, and I told her my story, and she said, "What was it, a tragedy or a comedy?" And I said right off, "Well, I think we made a tragedy out of a comedy." Or a comedy out of a tragedy. That's the way I said it. And it was, but we got through it all, and they applauded when it was all done, so it was worth it. But that was a sort of atmosphere that predominated the campus. English was like that. English was a strong subject, always has been with Emory. Latin was a weak subject. It only had one professor. That was it. And history was a good subject at Emory and always has been. And so between history and English and psychology, that was a good one too. And semi-science, I call it. And it was an open atmosphere. And you had to shape up and get the right grades in those things in order to get along well under the professors. Mathematics was a pretty good department at Emory. I love math, and I took every math course Emory had to offer. And I could have gotten my degree in math if I'd wanted to, but I wanted to be a chemist, and still do. I'm still trying.
Were you involved in music there as far as any performing groups or anything?
There was little music there. The only music was under Malcolm Dewey, who was also a professor of classical and Romance languages, and part-time developed the Emory Glee Club. And the Glee Club was the only form of music there at Emory when I was there.
Wow. Did you play piano for them or anything?
No, I didn't.
No.
And he developed that Glee Club to the point where they enjoyed European trips, maybe every other year and something like that. Fantastic. And he was really the founder of music as such at Emory University. But now it's a gigantic enterprise compared to what he had going.
Wow. So moving on, you came to MIT to study chemical engineering, and you got your degree in 1941. What made you come to MIT, and why chemical engineering as opposed to staying with pure chemistry?
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. That's a wonderful question. Are we doing all right on time?
Yep.
Well, I told you my father went to Georgia Tech and got 2 degrees from there in engineering, civil and electrical. Mechanical and electrical. What's the matter with me? That was my son who got the civil degree, and then Worcester Polytech. But and he had practiced engineering all his life. And after he retired from his practice, he came back to Georgia Tech as a teacher, and later also became a dean. And so he was well known on the campus, and his father, of course, had been there ahead of him. He died in 1924 when I was 8 years old, almost 9. And so he wanted me to study engineering. But at the end of my career at Emory in science and chemistry, I had worked under eminent organic chemists from Johns Hopkins who came there as a consultant named E. Emmett Reed, R-E-I-D. And you ask any chemist about E. Emmett Reed, and he'll tell you what I did. He was an eminent organic chemist, and he was in charge of the 6 of us who were working for master's degrees, and he portioned the ideas out that we were to work on and supervise the work. And Dr. Osborne R. Quayle, the head then of the department, had invited him there because he had known him professionally. And that was one of the best things Emory ever did, was to get E. Emmett Reed there. And he was a good influence for chemistry and direction to strengthen it further. And I ended up with a fellowship to Johns Hopkins for $1,000 for 1 year. They were going to test me out. And I don't blame them a bit. That was the way they did it. But I had this fellowship in my pocket for $1,000. And when my father started to put the heat on me about this, it's time to decide this now. What engineering are you going to study at Georgia Tech? And I said, well, I'm not ready to go all out for engineering. But after a few months of that, I said, well, I will agree to study chemical engineering somewhere if you will agree to support my first year wherever that is, because I have this fellowship to Johns Hopkins all lined up, and all I have to do is go up there and register. And so he finally agreed he would. And as he agreed, I said, well, now, where is the best place in this country to study chemical engineering? And I could just see what was going on in his mind, because if I'd gone to Georgia Tech, it would have been no cost. The first year wouldn't have cost him anything. And so he had to admit, though he was an honest man, that MIT was the best place. And so I said, well, I'm going to MIT then. And so I started correspondence with Chem Engineering here, and with Warren K. Lewis. There's a correspondence that's got to be in the records somewhere between him and me while I was lining up getting here. And so my father gave me a $1,200 check when I got on the railroad train in Atlanta to come up here. And I put it in the First National Bank there at the corner of Mass Avenue and Commonwealth. And that was all the money I had when I got here, and I never got another nickel.
Was that the fall of 1939?
No, that was the fall of 30. Oh, yes, I'm sorry. Yes, absolutely. That was the fall of 39, and it was beautiful weather. By the way, I keep wandering, but these are good stories. And the climate was so good that even through December and into January that I said, gosh, this is about like Atlanta, and I was worried about living up here in all the snow. And then, and you can look this one up on the record too, right here at MIT, on February 14, 1940, St. Valentine's Day, we had in Boston the biggest snowstorm of history. In 2 hours, it plunked 25 inches of snow on Boston. And you just go back to a newspaper and you'll find that's exactly what it says. And the next morning, you know, I was a student here. I was paying my money, and I was coming to class. And so I walked across that Harvard Bridge, as it was called. I lived on Commonwealth Avenue in a boarding house with about 6 other MIT guys. I couldn't get in the dorm. I was too late to get in the dorm, and it was much smaller than it is today anyway for graduate students. And so I walked across in the snow, and I walked up the steps at 77 Mass Avenue, and I opened the door, and by golly, it wouldn't come open, and it was locked. And they had locked the doors and gone away. And that, I am told, was the only day in the history of MIT when they had a lockout.
Wow.
And eminent people have told me that, so I don't have any reason to believe it. And I know I couldn't get in. I know it was locked. And so I went back and studied in my room, and the next day things were normal enough, so we got back together. But I guess the staff just couldn't get here from the professors and all. And so many of them called up, they had to shut the place down. And they tell me that was the only time. Well, I forget your question now, but did I answer it or not?
Yeah, yeah, and we can go on
Okay.
here too. When you were here at MIT, you were obviously here as a graduate student, and you're pretty focused on a particular subject. But did you have opportunity to take courses outside of outside of chemistry and chemical engineering? Any humanities subjects?
Uh, well, no humanities subjects, and I had little physics in Emory,
Mm-hmm.
and so they told me to take my choice of some physics courses that they wanted me to take, and I took optics, and I studied optics here at MIT as a physics course, and of course I had to get that on the record. And then they really pulled sort of a fast one, I thought. They said, we want you to take some of our chemistry courses because we aren't so sure of what you learned down there at Emory. And I said, well, I didn't come here to study chemistry. I came here to study chem engineering. And I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll go around and see the head of each chemical course in the Department of Chemistry, and I'll let him ask me any question he wants, and if I can't answer it, I'll take that course. This is the bald truth now, I'm telling you. So I did that, and I went around, and they all signed off. He doesn't have to take our course. And so I didn't have to take any chemistry courses, but I deliberately took physical chemistry here because I knew you had a famous professor here in physical chemistry, and I felt that I could learn a lot from his ideas on that, and I did. And
Who was that professor?
Oh, he's the fellow who invented Pyrex glass. Now, I've got that on the record, and you can go ask any chemist
Sure.
over there who did it. These names, I'm sorry,
It's okay.
I'm
You're doing so
badly.
well. You're doing so
Well, I did take those two courses, optics and physical chemistry, but aside from that, no humanities, and that was it.
Did you have time for any extracurricular activities?
Not here, no, not in graduate school, no. I did at Emory, and I took fencing, for example, and golf. I was on the golf team and things of that nature down there, but I didn't take any extracurricular studies here.
Did you get a chance to attend any of the concerts at MIT, either by student groups or professional concerts that held on campus?
Look, to my knowledge, and I'll admit the limitations of my knowledge right off the bat, I didn't know of any music at MIT when I was here.
Yeah.
Do you know that there was?
There certainly was. There was a gentleman, Henry Warren Jackson, who was conductor of the MIT Glee Club.
I've heard that name.
They were quite highly regarded.
Okay.
And the MIT Orchestra, though it was a struggling organization, it was still student-led, was around. There was the Banjo Club, which was quite popular. And then every spring they had a thing called the Tech Show that everybody talked about as being very popular.
Yeah. Well, you've told me a lot that I didn't know because I didn't know of any of those. What I did when I got to Boston was I made a beeline to the BSO. And I heard some wonderful performances there that I could just never have heard in Atlanta. The Haydn and Handel Society, the Messiah, and all that. And I heard a lot of Lehman's farewell concert down there at Symphony Hall. And great pianist, Ken, he was a Czech, I think, and he had one of those Slavic names, and I can't remember, but he was Chanovsky or something like that, and I heard him play more than once there. He was really outstanding. And of course I heard Kusevitsky, and that was my introduction to true orchestral music. He was just something special. And that brings up so many stories that I just can't even envision our getting them into this. But I recognized the talent of that man. That was my chief talent in myself, and I could see that he was he was a leader in the field. And when I first heard him play Beethoven's, the orchestra play Beethoven's Seventh Symphony under him, his direction, that made my hair stand up. And I knew that I had heard the best rendition of that you could hear. Mm-hmm. And I've heard fellas like Toscanini conduct it, and what was the famous German conductor?
There's so many.
Yeah, there's so many. But I've heard him conduct it.
Karajan?
No.
Furtwängler? There's so many, yeah.
No, it wasn't. I've heard Furtwängler do it.
Yeah.
But Koussevitzky had him beat all hollow. Really, I mean, until you've studied the work that he put into Beethoven's Seventh Symphony, you don't know what it means. I'm not talking to you personally. Yes, I'm talking rhetorically. Yes. But he just had everything figured out about that. His conducting in general was way above the normal level in America at that time. I know about Stock at Chicago and a few others, but they didn't measure up to Koussevitzky. But that's where I went to hear my music, and here in Boston, and I'm so glad I did. I don't think I heard any music outside of Symphony Hall, but I heard quite a bit down there. Wow. I spent more money on it than I should have, I think.
When you were here as a graduate student, there was a gentleman who was an undergraduate in civil engineering named John Bevicki. Is that name familiar to you? He's now a well-known composer, but I just wondered if you happened to have run into him, because that would have been an interesting...
What sort of music does he compose?
Oh, all kinds of orchestral music, choral music. He's does a lot of choral conducting these days, but I've played under him a couple times, doing some Bach cantatas, but the MIT concert band premiered a number of his pieces.
I see.
He's quite well known in the Boston area, in New England particularly. And, I just wondering if maybe you had known him.
The fact that I didn't know any music, I realize that from your remarks now that I should have found out more, but I really don't think I would have had much time to get involved in MIT music then.
Mm-hmm. This annual tradition that the Boston Pops called Tech Night at the Pops got started about that time. Did you go to any of those?
No.
You know about Tech Night at the Pops?
I know about it now, but the history has rolled so far since then.
But the MIT Glee Club at that time started singing then at Tech Night at the Pops. Just wondered if
the Pops were so different then from what you have today. Mm-hmm. I used to go to the Pops all right, but that was after I got out of college, went to work, and was married and had children and all that. Mm-hmm. But that's later on in life.
When you were here at MIT, can you talk about the cultural climate? I mean, I'm talking in I guess the broad sense of the word, cultural, as far as the way people were thinking. Were the students in general narrowly focused, or were they Because some people I've talked to who were students at the time thought of it as very much a technical school. And was that your experience, or did you see it as?
Well, I had a little bit different experience, yes, that brought some things to light. I ended up in the course that's called the practice school in chem engineering. Are you aware of that?
I wasn't not familiar with that term.
There's a book published by MIT, and you should get a copy of it and put it in your library. It's not music. It's about the flagship, it's called. And it's a book, the story, the full story of the practice school at MIT in chem engineering. And it ought to be in this library. It ought to be in every library at MIT. And I was in the practice school. And that meant that, number one, you had to have a 3.6 average in order to get into it. And when I was here, the way courses were graded were H, C, P, LP, F, and that was it. And the H was for honor, C was for credit, P was for pass, and L was for low pass, and F was for you know what. And so H was rated 4 and C was rated 3, so you had to be in between those two to get into the practice school. And I got in, let's just leave it at that. And so we had stations out in the field where we studied chemical engineering on a research basis for the companies where these stations were located. One in Bangor, Maine, one in Parlin, New Jersey, and one in Buffalo, New York at Lackawanna Steel, Bethlehem Steel at that time. And we worked on research projects for those people. And the MIT students were groups of 12 people, and in each station for about, I forget now, what would it be, 8, 10 weeks, something like that. And they were all good students. And there were a professor from MIT and an assistant professor, associate professor from MIT running each station. And so it was a scholastic endeavor. They assigned and supervised the research projects that were given to them by the management of the plant where we worked. Up in Bangor, it was making pulp for paper, and down in Parlin, it was making cellulose nitrate for gunpowder, and out in Lackawanna Steel, it was making steel for whatever you need for steel. And we got to know one another as student groups very well. And I found out, for example, that Joe Nouse, who was in my group and is still alive, I think, and living down on Cape Cod somewhere, I saw something that he had provided to the MIT news division. And he mentioned me in there because of marrying Dr. Lewis' daughter. Well, Joe Nouse was also interested in music, and he was a good jazz musician.
What was his instrument?
I don't know,
Uh-huh.
but I know he sang,
Uh-huh.
and that's a good instrument.
Absolutely.
And so he and I went on a few little musical episodes of our own, and he was a highly intelligent person, and I think better culturally trained maybe than I was. And he and I, that was an influence from MIT student body on me, but he was the only one I can remember now who had a sincere interest in music that I ran into here. Most of it was rigidly scientific or engineering And I think somebody should write a history of a particular group in the chem engineering practice school and see what they have done since then and feed it back to MIT. I think it would be a very interesting exercise. And maybe our group would be as good a place to start as any. But
wow. Well, looking at time, there's about 10 more minutes on the tape, but I was thinking if we can do another interview later in the week.
We can.
Then I could start and we can
Thursday
talk about Dr. Lewis, and maybe that would be a good place to start. So why don't we...
why not? Yeah. He's just as important an influence in my life as Alfredo Borelli.
That would be a great place to start the next interview.
Right, that's fine.
Okay?
Yep.
So I want to thank you very, very much for this, and
well, I hope you're pleased. That is always a problem. But you had wonderful questions. I'll say that was the best organized question set that I've ever run into.
Well, thank you.